to meet you.
I'd like you to know that I made a special trip from the water today.
Thank you.
So that you're fully functional during this meeting. Is that special water? I think so.
You think this is all the drinks know who was getting which water?
I did not. When they left my presence, they were still wrapped in a six-pack.
Okay. I'll go ahead and drink it.
Good evening and welcome to the Police Oversight Board's meeting. It's Wednesday, May 16th. They're working on that. We are going to start with our Pledge of Allegiance, and since we don't have Member St. John or Member Waits here, Chair Waits here, we're going to change things up. And Eric, if you'll lead us in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you so much. And Member Cass, if you would lead us in our mission statement, please.
Our mission statement is advancing constitutional policing and accountability for APD in Albuquerque and the Albuquerque community.
Thank you. I would like to, if it's all right by you guys, just take care of a little bit of housekeeping that has come up since our last board meeting. So on April 13th, the POB received an email from an at-home viewer with some observations and insights that were helpful in remembering that not everyone participating in our board meetings are doing so from this room. We would request that members demonstrate respect for one another, those watching either in the audience or at home and in the decision-making process, by asking to be recognized by the chair prior to entering a discussion and refraining from talking over one another if and when debate occurs. Please be mindful of your microphones. If you are speaking, please be sure that your microphone is on and pointed in your direction. If you are not speaking, please turn your microphones off. This will help to ensure there's no interference with our at-home audience's ability to hear our discussion accurately. Okay? Thank you. All right, so the first thing up on our agenda is the approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve?
I motion to approve.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? Okay. I've got something to bring up. We had discussed at the end of our last board meeting, perhaps altering the order in which people were recognized on the agenda, and we had done this to kind of accommodate the members of city that come to these meetings and provide us with their city reports. The history behind, I've learned today actually, having them placed at the end of our agenda is so that they are active participants in our board meetings, that they hear everything that's going on and are available for discussion. And so the question then becomes, do we want to move down the road that we discussed before and suspend the order of the agenda as laid out by our policies and procedures, or keep things as they are?
Chair Galloway, the minutes don't accurately reflect the fact that we had a motion at the last meeting to do that, and we unanimously approved that. So we'll have to retract that motion if we decide not to do it. And I think we should do it. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Should do it. I'm not sure I know what the motion was. Was it to put their participation at the front end of the agenda? Okay, thank you. I don't care, one way or the other.
Well then, if there's no more discussion, let's go on ahead and vote. All in favor of bringing the city reports to the top of the agenda, adjusting our agenda, the order of our agenda. All in favor, say aye, please.
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, we are going to adjust the order of our agenda for this board meeting. With that said, I would make the motion that we proceed in this order. Public comments next, reports from city staff, reports from subcommittees, the consent agenda cases, non-concurrence cases, serious use of force and officer-involved shooting cases, review of Garrity materials, meeting with council, other business, and adjournment.
I
Yes,
second.
sir.
Chair
Oh.
Galloway,
And an approval of the minutes.
approval of the minutes.
From last board meeting. Probably we'll stick that in there between this that we're doing right now, the approval of the agenda and the changes to the agenda and public comment. Thank you, Director Harness. Any discussion? I've made that motion. Do we have a second?
I second.
Okay. And you said no discussion, so all in favor, say aye, please.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. So that said, moving on, I hope everybody's had an opportunity to review the minutes. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes as they stand?
Chair Galloway? We have to make a correction to the minutes because at the last meeting, under other business, I made the motion that we do what we just did. And I believe, I'm not sure who seconded it. I think it was maybe Member Fine. And it was unanimously voted, and it's not listed on the other business, so we need to correct that. And with that correction, I motion that we approve the minutes.
Okay, can the CPO office make that change to our minutes? Thank you. Do we have a second? Great. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Wonderful. Minutes have passed. I believe we have a gentleman by the name of Robert Heckman available for public comment. Thank you, sir. And welcome. It's good to see you again, Robert.
Thank you, Chair Galloway, board members, Director Harness. My name is Robert Heckman. I'm with APD Forward Coalition. And I'm here tonight to speak specifically about some of the, or one agenda item, 14A, which I just believe was moved up to after public comment. And specifically APD's discussion on some of the APD policies, 252, use of force, 253, use of force definitions, 254, intermediate weapon systems, 255, use of force appendix. Our coalition received drafts of these policies on Friday from Mr. Jeremy Schmiel, who's with the City Attorney's Office. That was May 11th, so just a few days ago. So to be fair, our coalition really hasn't had much time to read and reflect on the draft policies. So my intent tonight is to provide some kind of preliminary feedback, but most importantly, APD4 would like to gain a better understanding of the policy development process, especially as it has to do with the public involvement with the use of force suite drafts. In his email to APD Forward, Mr. Schmiel stated that the draft policies are currently under technical review by the DOJ and monitoring team over the next several weeks. And when that process is done, APD and the city intend to follow the, quote, formal policy development process. And so I'd like to learn more about that, how that process unfolds, and again, specifically, how the public engages in that process. As I think we can all agree, or I'll speak for APD Forward, this is one of the most critical policy suites that APD is going to develop, and I think it's going to be critical that there's transparency and public input. So with that as our main question, I just want to provide some kind of initial comments on the drafts we received from Mr. Schmiel. The use of force 252, the draft still kind of reads in a manner that focuses on liability. That's to say, you know, when is it reasonable to use force? And then there seems to be a real focus on the Graham standard. That to us is a bit concerning. I attended the Civilian Police Academy, and many of the board members were there as well, Chair Galloway, Director Harness, and some of you might remember that our use of force class that we took for 8 hours really reflected that attitude. Oh, sorry. With that, I'll end. Thank you. Unless there are any questions for me.
Do you have is there,
No, I don't have much more.
okay, please then go on ahead and continue.
Thank you, Chair Galloway. So that's one of our concerns with the use of force policy. The de-escalation in the policy, I believe is 252, use of force definitions, kind of inexplicably does not refer to policy 255, which is the use of force de-escalation. Instead, I believe, refers to APD Procedural Order 219, which is a response to behavioral health. That's fine, but in our experience, and again, at the Civilian Police Academy, there seemed to be this notion that de-escalation was a crisis intervention technique, kind of isomorphic to people in crisis, as opposed to a tool in an officer's toolkit to be used to de-escalate any situation that would require it. And so our concern is that these things, I think, need to weave into the policies and also have repetitive requirements for training on de-escalation. Like anything else, active listening, things like that take a lot of coaching, a lot of experience. They aren't easy things to do. And so that's our main. Those are our main points with what we had. And the one last thing I'll say regarding policy 255, use of force de-escalation, is the language in there, there's an awful lot of shoulds, and we would like to see those be more directive in their language and changed many of them to shall. An officer shall consider these things. They aren't, well, I'll leave it at that. Yeah, the language be a little more directive and less of a suggestion.
Thank you so much
I have
for your
a
comment.
question
Yes,
for-
Member Cass.
It's good to see you here, and and I think you'll hear a lot more about that tonight. I think the city is prepared to give an overview of that. I can tell you that the process that started a couple of weeks ago has been dramatically altered as of yesterday, I think, so that it will slow down and there'll be a chance to weigh in publicly on more of this than had been put down before. So I think it's a work in progress, and I think you'll hear a lot more about it. And I'm sure all Jeremy Schmiel, the attorney who's in charge of this, is here, and he'll be able to tell you at some point here. So,
Well, thank you, Board Member Cass.
Chair Galloway?
Yes.
Mr. Heckman, thank you for coming. I appreciate you coming on such short notice, getting it on Friday. I'd like to know what version did you get the 252 version that includes the most recent Department of Justice comments?
No, sir, not from Mr. Schmiel.
So you got the older version that didn't include, and maybe you could check with him later at break or something, but that's not the most current version that was presented and discussed. So you probably need to get that one. And I would think that you would want the Department of Justice input, because they made some significant suggestions and are pretty forceful about it, and they seem to be in line with what you guys are talking about. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Member Larson. Yes, and we wanted to be respectful of the process. In Mr. Schmiel's email, he indicated that they're under technical review, so they're engaging the DOJ and they're engaging the monitoring team to get feedback prior to, as I said, the formal policy development process. So, yes, obviously we'd be interested in receiving any iterations of the draft that exist.
Mr. Schmiel, perhaps when you give your presentation here momentarily, you might be able to guide us better as how you would like commentary from the public and, you know, from Robert and APD Ford brought on board to you all. Thank you. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chair Galloway, Board, Director Harness.
All right. Well, moving right along on our agenda, let's go on ahead and hear reports from city staff, and let's start with APD. Do we have a representative here from APD?
Good evening, members of the board. My name is Commander Mike Miller. I'm from Internal Affairs. And basically, I'll just give you a rundown of the data that we have for the month of April. So starting with the dispatch calls for service, from our communications center, we actually had 44,444, which is a small decrease of about 787 calls from the previous month. For our internal cases, we actually had 11 cases that were completed. 10 of those were from Internal Affairs, and one that was sent out to the Area Command where it was investigated. We also had one internal case that was administratively closed as well. In reference to those cases, we had some discipline that was imposed. There were 5 verbal reprimands. There were 2 letters of reprimands. There were 2 suspensions of 8 hours. There was 1 suspension of 40 hours. There was 1 suspension of 192 hours. And then also 1 suspension of 272 hours as well. And then you can see there as well, there's a resignation as well in lieu of termination. In terms of our early intervention system, there were 73 alerts that were distributed. And for April of 2018, we have 27 cases that are pending, and we have 6 other IA cases that were open for the Area Command. Basically, that's all the information I have from Internal Affairs, and I stand for any questions at this point.
Chair Galloway. Thanks, Commander Miller. Quick question for you. I read in the mini report from the monitor that there were in excess of 500 use of force investigations still pending. Is that correct?
Madam Chair and Member Lawson, I'm sorry, that's actually a different unit. I'm not sure if you're aware of it or not. IA has been broken up into 2 different areas. There's an IA misconduct and an IA force as well. I do have a representative that may be able to answer that question, though, but I don't have the answer for you.
Is that representative planning on speaking today?
Good evening, Madam Chair and Board. Your question again, sir?
I read in the mini monitor's report that there were in excess of 500 use of force pending investigations. And I was just asking if that was correct, and then I have a couple of follow-up questions.
There are cases that have been completed by the chain of commands, which they have been approved by the commanders. However, as far as being filed away and considered completed in our software system, the IA Pro system, we did develop a backlog there due to the checks that were needed to ensure that all the boxes were filled in correctly, all the information was uploaded correctly. So as far as that, there was a backlog from getting into the system and being housed away. Since that report has came out, every week we have been decreasing that number, so the number doesn't sit at 500 anymore.
Okay, a follow-up question is, does the Police Oversight Board get to review all the use of force cases?
As far as for the as far as the findings, if
the administrative
there was a preponderance of evidence that the use of force was in policy?
Yes, sir.
Once the cases are completed, I would assume so, yes.
So can you give me a rough idea of how many of the, I'm imagining that these use of force cases, that were pending, say there were 400 or 300,
Yes, sir.
that there would be a scale that the majority of them would be relatively minor uses of force, perhaps what the new level 1, 2, and 3 is. If level 1 is minimal or minor, the majority of them would be minor, and far fewer would be serious use of force. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Going forward, yes, sir.
So I was trying to figure out a way that we might help with that, because according to the ordinance, we're supposed to review use of force investigations, and we would really like to figure out a way. I haven't spoken with the board about this, so this is my view, but I have a sense of the board is, we would like to figure out a way that we could help you expedite this backlog of cases, so we don't get buried with them at some point. And I was thinking that I was talking to an attorney today who suggested that maybe, since we all have to look at those together, and you're waiting to put them into IA Pro, maybe there's a way that we could get together with Director Harness and you all and figure out a way that we could get an expedited process for us to look at that, and maybe work with you to avoid, to download, to get the backlog done away with. Not complaints. If it's a complaint, that's a different issue. But if it's just a use of force, and it's a relatively mild use of force, that is, excuse me for a second, that if it's only for minor and it's reasonable, necessary, and proportional to respond to the level of resistance to safely resolve the incident, it seems like it's something that we should be able to work together so we can meet our need to review those, and for your need to be able to get those off the books and get them, so we can get ahead of this avalanche instead of behind it.
Yes, sir. And correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that the serious use of forces, which are cert cases, the board does get all of the serious use of force cases.
Okay,
As far as
yeah, I understand
the
that, and
opportunity to
I'm not
review it.
asking, I'm trying to figure out how to get the, just the use of force cases.
Right, okay.
And when you got them, when you all say that they're not a backlog, because you've already done the investigations and you're just putting them into IA Pro and doing what you have to do. Am I right on that? That there's a lot of them?
Yes, sir, and I should expand on that. There were cases that were at different levels within the chain of command. At the sergeant, the lieutenant, and the commander level, the field supervisors, just having to deal with all of their other duties, they did have cases at each level. We have had, I feel, significant progress compared to the numbers when it came out at 500, but all of the involved supervisors, sergeant, lieutenant commanders, they have been expediting and completing their reviews as quick as possible, just to ensure that they are coming to good conclusions and findings, and then forwarding that to the Internal Affairs Force Division, where the administrative personnel are waiting to put those into IA Pro, which we did bring in more manpower in that area as well, so we have another full-time employee assisting with putting them into IA Pro. So we have seen a reduction from that original 500 number.
Okay, I thank you for your time, and I think I can follow up later on
Right,
one more
and I
information.
believe you'd like to sample the level 1 or the use of force reports and take a look at our findings for it, and I think that's doable. I understand that you guys get the serious use of forces, so we could get the regular chain of command use of forces to you as well.
Thank you very
if
much.
that's
I
what you're asking.
appreciate your time and
Okay,
your answer.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, excuse me, just out of curiosity, do you have a ballpark of where you guys sit now? You said there's been a reduction from the 500. Do you have like a ballpark?
Yes, ma'am, I could bring it up real quick. I could give you an exact number. So we're at about half. From 500, we've reduced it to about half.
But to about 250?
Yes,
Somewhere in
ma'am.
that neighborhood?
In that area.
Okay, and I'm sorry, one more time, what was your name?
My name is Luke Langwood. I'm a lieutenant in the Internal Affairs Force Division, because as the commander explained, our internal affairs was split into 2 divisions.
Right, right. Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.
Any other questions?
Wonderful. All righty. I guess that's a good question. Is there anybody else from APD that would like to have the microphone for a moment? Okay, great. Do we have a representative from the mayor's office here? Okay. City attorney's office.
Good evening, Chair Galloway and board members. So I'm not sure where you want me to start. You can direct me, or I can just head off.
I think head off. I have a feeling we're going to spend some time on the suite of
Okay,
policies.
sure.
Suite of use of force
So
policy.
to address Mr. Heckman's questions, I think it's first necessary to clarify the process. So what's going on right now, and as you, Chair Galloway, know, and Dr. Cass, and also Mr. Larson, to an extent, that what the city and the parties are engaging in right now with regard to the use of force policy suite is technical assistance from Dr. Ginger. And that was anticipated by filing 355. That spelled out the format for the mini reports, and it also spelled out Dr. Ginger's scope of technical assistance. So that's what's happening right now with regard to 252 through 255. The email I sent to Mr. Allen, actually, which was forwarded to Mr. Heckman, was responsive to the request to receive a copy of the drafts, which he had learned about through whatever channels, which I accommodated. But what it does is it raises the question of how to bring the amici along with this process. And as a first step, we're having those meetings. We already had yesterday the meeting with your group, and we went over an update on the compliance plan. And then we're going to be having those very similar meetings with the other amici, and we'll be providing them the whole load of drafts. And that whole load of drafts, because I think it needs clarification that earlier when Board Member Larson said that there was a new draft from the city, those were substantial edits to the existing draft by DOJ. And so I think in order to move through this in a very clear way, so it's understood by the amici what's happening, because this is sort of a pre-policy development process, because it's the city availing itself of that technical assistance, we have to talk about that. But as a first step, we're going to get those drafts to all of the amici. And then, you saw it right there, Mr. Heckman rightfully wanted to provide comments. And I think we have to have discussion with the parties in the monitor about the best way to do that, because I think there's not even the draft yet. We're working on the draft. And POB's been involved in those conversations because of its role, identified role in the settlement agreement and the ordinance that call for your involvement in policy development. And so the decision was made to bring POB along in that conversation. So to answer Mr. Heckman's question, the meaning of that, I guess, formal policy development process, so that means 352 will be followed. And so what can be anticipated is before OPA, there are those, certainly with POB, there are conversations about 252, which should be much streamlined because y'all will be in those meetings and we'll hear all these conversations and take notes and have the ability to, I believe, interject at times where you find the, not the obligation, but the opportunity. So I think that addresses the first piece. You tell me what the second piece is.
Well, I guess I need some clarification. We did have a series of meetings over the last couple of weeks. I say series, I think that I participated in 3 that had something to do with 252 and that suite of policies. Our comments, if I'm not mistaken, are due back by May 30th on the draft. My understanding was that then those comments were going to be turned into the policy itself. Is that inaccurate?
Chair Galloway, so what we're doing, and as it was discussed in that meeting yesterday, we're going to literally go, so the encouragement by Dr. Ginger was to have written comments to the language in the policy. And I think that that was the, everyone in the room was encouraged to do that.
Right.
So the process moving forward is going to be that, literally going through line by line of the draft sent by the Department of Justice attorneys and talking them through. So the deadline for the 30th certainly is to reflect the need to comment upon the language set out in 252, just 252 by DOJ.
Right. And we are trying to expedite that process, right, and get it as quickly as possible so that we can get a final product and begin training with APD and whatnot, right?
Right, but I want to take a step back from the word, Chair Galloway, I want to take a step back from the word expedite, because I think it needs to be done very thoroughly. There have been, and Mr. Heckman pointed it out, he sort of hit the nail on the head with one of his comments about the policy, and that was Graham. You know, and then Board Member Larson also used reasonable, necessary, and proportional in his comments just now to Lieutenant Langwitt. So I think there was an initial hope that that would be something that was expedited. But I think as we've had more meetings and conversations, it's something that needs to be deliberately and thoughtfully worked through so that the policy is a reflection of the principles set out in the settlement agreement,
Right.
and it's very workable and applicable for officers in the field and then also for the investigations of those use of force incidents.
Can I get one more in? Just, so my reasoning behind that expedited comment is this now the time for APD Forward to bring their commentary to us or to you or to a designated entity within this process to get the ball moving?
Sure. So Chair Galloway, as I said, this process and the involvement of POB is a reflection of the import that is placed upon y'all as a board in the settlement agreement and then also in the ordinance. I think it's very appropriate for you to serve as a mechanism for those comments from the amici, and I think that would be very positive and productive. But I don't know that the touch point would be the city, the parties in the monitor, because again, this is a pre-policy development process
Right.
that's being worked through just because of the way forward that was presented by Dr. Ginger as reflected in the stipulation.
Perfect, thank you. Yes, Member Fine.
Chair Galloway, Mr. Schmiel. So if I understand you correctly, please correct me if I'm wrong. The May 30th deadline is just for us to get our comments in about how it's worded. That is not the, then once that's done, there will be a period in which everybody can review that and all the people who are editing things and submitting things to make it a real draft. Is that correct, first?
Chair Galloway, Board Member Fine, that's correct.
Okay, so then, let me follow up. Okay, so once there's a draft, that is, that there's some consensus on, will there be an opportunity for public comment, either in this board or in any other form, hopefully, and other forms? So how does that work? Once you have a draft, then what happens?
Chair Galloway, Board Member Fine, as it stands right now, the anticipated form is the Office of Policy Analysis, as set out in 352.
And are all
I
the
think-
amici invited to that?
It's a public, so to address your question more specifically, we can certainly, and I could talk to the department about addressing the need to have it in a more public, larger form or whatever, so that can take place, because I think the importance, as stated earlier, of these policies is central to the efficacy of the settlement agreement.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Heckman, are you satisfied with that?
Yes, thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Yes, Member Cass.
Yes, I have a comment, and I was at the meeting yesterday, and things have changed, as I mentioned earlier, and I think the result is that the process is going to be slowed down a little bit. I think that's good, and I think that was agreed at the meeting, that it was everyone was more interested in getting the right policy than in creating an inadequate policy and then trying to train or modify the training after the policy was again modified. So I think it was agreed that everyone is satisfied with a slower process than with one that might lead to a less, not quite as good a policy. But one of the things that I took away, though, is, and I think has to do with the DOJ edits, and I think that's, if I can have an email that was sent out with edits from the DOJ that concern this policy, that is from Stephen Riles, and I think if it's appropriate, I would like to at least excerpt from that what the point of this, of these modifications is primarily, and that is it's to shift the use of the use of force paradigm in APD consistent with the CASA, and I think you mentioned that. And the CASA requires in letter and in spirit that APD holds officers to a high standard when it comes to a use of force. Rather than the officers asking, can I use force, they should be asking, should I use force, and how can I avoid it? The CASA requires that APD officers try to avoid the use of force, that when force is the only option, they use the minimum amount of force necessary, and that they stop using force when it is no longer necessary. So I think this is a significant shift, and I think the objections that were raised was that the words of Graham were lost, the Graham and the Garner case. That case law were kind of absent from the policy, but the spirit was to improve on Graham. And I think an important point about Graham is that it says, this is again quoting Stephen Riles, the CASA requires more restrictions on the use of force than is allowed by Graham. Graham is not prescriptive about what force should be used. It simply sets a standard for when a use of force violates the Fourth Amendment. So, for example, Graham holds that the availability of other options is irrelevant to whether the force was a violation of the Fourth Amendment. And I think that's very important. And from the standpoint of a citizen who's weighing in on which of the use of force policies I would like to have applied to me if I were being arrested, I would much prefer this rewrite, which is that the minimum amount of force is going to be used rather than what's allowed under the Fourth Amendment, the Graham case. So in any case, I think the spirit of this policy is a big improvement and consistent with the CASA, of course. So I just wanted to, this seemed like a good chance to bounce that off of somebody who is involved in this, so.
Chair Galloway,
Yes, sir.
I hate to do this, but I want to get it clarified, Mr. Smeal, that the draft that you sent to APD Forward did not include the feedback that was given from Mr. Riles at DOJ.
Chair Galloway, Board Member Larson, yes, and that was his request. I responded to his request. He asked me for the draft of the city, I believe, I don't have the email right in front of me, but that was my response to the request. And I think that what all this discussion is very helpful, because really, and literally just yesterday, either during or after the meeting with POB, CPOA, I expressed the need to figure out a way for all of the amici to know what's going on with this process. And so to the extent that that can be, I mean, we have to talk about that with the parties, because these aren't secret meetings. I mean, I think that has to be very clear. I wanted to accommodate the request from Mr. Allen, and I responded to his request. So, when he asked me for the APD policy, the draft, I gave him that. He didn't ask me for the other document because, quite frankly, it was literally just received by me. So I'm not sure. I think really what all of this discussion meets out for me, at least, is that we have to clarify how this is going to play out, because I don't think we need to have this, you know, where Mr. Heckman's coming and asking questions about, wait, what? And we have other documents floating around. It doesn't behoove the process to have that going on.
I understand and I agree, and I'm not, what I'm trying to get at is just to be sure that when we talk about us making comments by May 30th to a draft, the draft that we're talking about is the draft that DOJ sent back, correct?
Chair Galloway, Board Member Larson, yes, and that was what was stated yesterday in the meeting that I don't think that you were there. I think it was Ms. Galloway, Dr. Cass, and maybe you're to my right. The room gets large, but that was, yes, the draft circulated by the Department of Justice on whatever day that was. And
Okay.
and everyone has a copy on the board, I'm assuming?
So if Mr. Heckman was to go back and talk to Mr. Allen, I guess, and they were to request the draft that we're working from right now, they could get that draft.
As stated just earlier, Chair Galloway, Board Member Larson, those are going to be provided to all of the amici at the meetings that we're having subsequent to tonight's. I think there's one tomorrow. I don't have the schedule right in front of me, but those are going to be provided to everyone,
Okay.
all of the amici, all of the drafts. So the city's draft of all of those policies, the Department of Justice only responded to 252, so that would be the only response that we would have from them.
Okay. Thank you very much, and I was there, and I didn't talk as much as I've been talking tonight.
Any other comments? Do you have anything else for us?
I do actually have a few other things.
Please.
So there's been considerable discussion about response to behavioral health, SOP 219. Now, the history of that one, that was the last policy that made its way out of the policy development process previously, and it has been subject of discussion. That one is subject to, or it implicates the McClendon class settlement. And so that one, along with, I think 5 others, right around 5 others, were reworked. But importantly, 219 is implicated by the settlement agreement. And it was, as I said, it went through the policy development process and was published toward the end of last year. Since the last year, and now, there have been meetings with Mr. Kubra and city officials looking at the language, because some of the language, I think, that was either legally required or sort of hopefully placed in there, at least from Mr. Cooper's perspective, wasn't in there. So there is a draft of 219 that takes into consideration those needs and concerns, and that is going to go to OPA. I'm working on that with the department, but it's going to go through the policy development process, importantly, and I wanted to let you guys know about that development. My understanding was that because of the settlement, there was a time sort of urgency to it. I did receive some correspondence from Ms. Board Member Vandeventer asking the question, hey, what's going on with these policies and that policy in particular? And so I wanted to follow up on that and let you all know it was going to be at OPA and go through the full policy development process. The mediation MOU that Mr. Jackson and city attorney staff have been working on, that is now it's signed by UNM officials and Mr. Harness. So that just needs to go through our side of things. The CAO has to sign off in it. Well, there was oh, yes, I'm sorry. It's an MOU related to data provision by the department as the analyst is working for the CPOA. So that MOU, and I think it's been a subject of discussion in the past, that's just awaiting some signatures along with the contract, basically, for the services. So those two things are making their way through the city side of things. And I have them on the top of my radar, and I'll bug whoever I need to get them through as quickly as possible.
Thank you. Yes, Member Fine.
Chair Galloway, do you have a timeline on that for the city to get the signatures done, a ballpark idea?
You know, Chair Galloway, Board Member Fine, I don't, but you have my ability to bother people as sort of a timeline. I would say early next week.
Okay, thank you, that helps.
Sure.
Thank you. Any other questions? Anything else?
I think that covers everything.
Okay,
All right, guys.
thanks.
Thank you.
All right, CPOA, Director Harness.
Good evening, Chair Galloway, honorable board members. I'm sorry, I was distracted. I got a text that I had to share with Investigator Scott Stapole. But it appears that Attorney Schmiel covered the UNM contract status, but Dr. Verplu requested that I read a statement because she wasn't unable to make it this evening. The Civilian Police Oversight Agency has contracted with the Institute for Social Research, ISR, to provide research, statistical analysis, and technical assistance to track and present findings related to data and policy trends of the Albuquerque Police Department and the CPOA. The ISR was established in 1987, conducts basic and applied social research, and is affiliated with the College of Arts and Science at the University of New Mexico. The ISR has 9 senior, doctoral, and master-level researchers and approximately 30 regular staff and student staff members. Staff is well-versed in data collection, data entry and analysis, survey design, interviewing, collection of secondary data, report writing, and other technical skills necessary for successful completion of research contracts. Miriam Verplu, PhD, will be the principal investigator responsible for the research and deliverables for the contract. Dr. Verplu has extensive experience conducting social science research and project management. The court signed the mediation MOU for mediation to move forward as of the 14th of May. So the project will go into effect, and we will report back to the court after the 6-month expiration of this MOU in November. We will be working with the community mediation program through the city of Albuquerque. Tyson Hummel is the director of the ADR program. They have a specified community mediation program in place, and that's the program that we will use to facilitate the mediation for the complaints as defined in the MOU. And those complaints are dealing with communication with officers, inadvertent mistakes on reports, traffic accident reports, and at the discretion of the executive director, myself, at this point, level 7 violations, class 7 violations, as long as they fit all of the other criteria outlined in the MOU for participation in the program, then at the discretion, a level 7 not meeting that other criteria can go to mediation. I will be participating in the status conference tomorrow with Judge Brack, which starts at 10:15. I know with the mess-ups with the city email, some of you may not have received Dr. Ginger's mini report. Okay. If you have comments that you would like to that document, please have those to me by close of business on the 25th of May. Yesterday, APD revealed their progress with its compliance plan. Myself, Dr. Cass, Member Galloway, Member Larson were at that meeting. Speaking for myself, I think it is great progress and positive progress that isn't lip service. I think it's actual accomplishments, and I want to congratulate them for the work that they are doing. The Office of Policy Analysis and the Policies Procedures Review Board are up and running again. Currently, it's contemplated that the Office of Policy Analysis will meet every Thursday to move through. I do not have a schedule for the PPRB. There is going to be a schedule of policies produced. for the Office of Policy Analysis so that this board will have some knowledge and some heads up as to what's coming down the pipe. There are also some changes as far as the Office of Policy Analysis in that they are now taking minutes. Those minutes will be posted online at the Albuquerque Police Department's website, and they will be posting the policies with changes for public review. So those are changes as it relates to the Office of Policy Analysis. And I see Member Fine has a question.
You said that OPA will meet every Thursday. Can you tell us where and when?
Chair Galloway, Member Fine, it is 10 o'clock Thursday mornings in the conference room on the 5th floor of the Chiefs Conference Room.
Thank you.
I might mention that next Thursday's meeting has been canceled.
Tomorrow's meeting.
Tomorrow's meeting, yes.
Yes,
That-
I know we're
That's
all.
next Thursday.
I know we're all messed up because it's
Right,
Wednesday
okay.
and we're supposed to meet
Yes.
on Thursdays, and
Yes.
yes. Yes, so tomorrow's meeting, yes, has been canceled, but they do anticipate that there will be a meeting on the 24th. As it relates to the Office of Policy Analysis, on the 10th, there was a presentation for a policy on Star Chaser. And the members of OPA felt that there needed to be many revisions to that policy. And so it was not offered for comment and review by the members of the department. It's being withdrawn for some significant rewrites. This afternoon, I received an email from the head of that policy writing, I believe he's the SME, Lieutenant Brown. And he proposed getting together to continue the dialogue on the policy. So I spoke with Dr. Cass and Member Cruz, and if possible, we'll have those parties along with City Attorney Schmiel and Investigator Scotch-DePole at that policy subcommittee meeting to further that discussion on the Star Chaser policy. Star Chaser is a device that allows for a projectile to attach a GPS system on a car and is used to track vehicles so that the purpose is to lessen the need for police pursuits. We will need an outreach agenda for the meeting next on the 23rd. I'm sorry, no. We'll need an outreach agenda for the meeting on Tuesday. Right. On May 23rd, I will be at the Academy for the cadets at 12:30, so if any board members would like to attend, please let me know. And we're going to have an hour with the Academy, and they are soon to graduate, I believe, in 2 weeks. Other than that, I stand for questions.
Yes, please.
Chair Galloway, when I was talking about the outstanding use of force investigations, I got a little confused, and this says in the ordinance that the administrative office shall audit and monitor all instances of use of force by the police. Is that right? That's your understanding?
Chair Galloway, Member Larson, that's correct.
And are we doing that? Is it being done?
Chair Galloway, Member Larson, I receive a report from IA on weekly IA investigations. I'm not currently receiving a use of force report.
But we don't get any of that. You get it. So it just goes to you, and that's meeting this requirement. I mean, that's what the board has accepted in the past, correct?
Chair Galloway, Member Larson, that's correct. That's the ordinance and the policies and procedures in place.
Well, the policies and procedures don't supersede the ordinance, correct?
Chair Galloway, Member Larson, that's correct. The ordinance would carry the day.
Okay. Well, I think that at some point, the board should have a discussion about, you know, what's going on when you're supposed to audit it and monitor it, then what is our responsibility with respect to that? Should we look at any of those? And you're getting a weekly report from IA on all the investigations that they're pending, except we're not getting the use of force. And so I think that that's something the board needs to address, and maybe it's the case review subcommittee that does that. I don't know, but thank you.
There's one other thing under your list, Director Harness, and that is update on the search for new legal counsel. That's on the list of things that you were going to cover, so I didn't want you to close before you were done.
So on the agenda that was published by the CPOA's office, they had that under a personnel subcommittee.
Oh, okay.
The copy that you're looking at was the original draft that I sent them
Oh,
before
I'm
I
sorry.
was
Okay.
re-educated.
All
So
right.
I don't know if you two want to tackle that topic now, or if you want to wait. Okay. All right. Anything else? Okay, thank you, Director Harness. Reports from subcommittees is next, and I am first out of the gate. So the Community Outreach Subcommittee met on Friday, April 27th. Some items that were discussed, and I've just listed them out for expediency for everybody. The CPOA brochure format and content was discussed. Member Fine has reworked the content to be easily readable for the general public. The committee will review the rework at our May 22nd meeting. An introductory skeletal statement about the CPOA and the POB was provided to the committee by Ms. Bustos. This statement is an effort to provide board members with general talking points that can be used to open doors with individuals and organizations within the community and bring awareness about who we are and what we do. It can be tailored to fit the communication style of each individual member. You all should have a copy of that. I've asked Ms. Bustos to provide that to you and an example of how that was used and tailored to fit with some outreach we've been doing. Several community events were discussed as opportunities to coordinate the mission of the POB and the CPOA with the mission of organizations hosting events. These events that we discussed that are coming up include Healthcare for the Homeless on May 25th and June 15th, sorry. June 15th. I believe Youth Expo on June 29th and 30th. Equality New Mexico Board meeting in July. And if anybody has any interest in participating in those events, please contact Member Fine. She is the keeper of all of that info. We have begun some media outreach. Ms. Bustos and I have been working with, I've been working with a lady by the name of Stephanie Tejas at the New Mexico Inquisition, which is a kind of social media tongue-in-cheek political show that is done. Carrie Schwanitz at KOAT, Katie Doherty at KRQE, and Erica Zuko at KOB. We have scheduled a 30-minute interview with KOB's Eye on New Mexico. That interview, I believe, I'm looking for Amanda, is tentatively scheduled for May 29th at 3 o'clock, and the segment will air June 3rd. Director Harness, Member Fine, and I will be participating in that interview. In an effort to ensure that members and attendees of CPC meetings are familiar with the roles of the POB and the CPOA, Director Harness is going to be making presentations at each of those CPC meetings on an annual basis ongoing. Social media is a medium that's not really being utilized to its fullest potential right now. Director Harness and Ms. Bustos are going to look into posting local relevant content that would be of interest to the members of our community, in addition to the information that they're currently posting about cases and stories that are happening around the country. The CPOA is going to start utilizing our Twitter account more to tweet information regarding meeting dates, times, and locations. And Director Harness was going to look into social media boosts to see how we might be able to kind of enlarge our audience there. And our next outreach subcommittee meeting is going to take place on May 22nd. I'm not sure if Ms. Bustos got an email out that the time needs to be adjusted to 2:30 rather than 2, though. So if that's acceptable to Member Fine and Member St. John, that's when we will be meeting next. And that's the end of the outreach committee subcommittee meeting. Next on our agenda, I think, is policy and procedure. So Dr. Cass.
My presentation of the Policy and Procedure Committee has been drastically shortened with this change in the agenda. So in any case, we met last on April 19th, and at the last meeting we had a presentation by ACLU. Leon Howard, who's the lead attorney for ACLU, presented information on the cell site simulator technology, which APD owns, and ACLU has been asked to write a policy for the city or by the city to control the use or the acquisition and the use of that information. And we asked to collaborate on that, and so we heard a presentation, and that is a work that's in progress. I might also mention that the city was interested enough to send City Attorney Steve Aguilar to that meeting, and we had a good discussion about this sort of technology. I mean, one of the problems with the technology is that there's a lot of proprietary information that's associated with it, and as a result, it's almost impossible to get any details about the use and capability of this technology. In principle, it's used to find lost hikers and small children. In practice, we're worried that it infringes on privacy rights by acquiring telephone data aside from just your location. So, as I say, that's a policy that ACLU's been asked to write, and the POB is going to collaborate and to the best of our ability. Regarding other items that have been mentioned, we've been engaged in this in the discussions with DOJ and the amici and at the U.S. Attorney's Office about 252 and about the use of force policies, and I think we've covered that as far as what our policy committee is associated with. I think that it's an enlightening procedure, and I think that what's going to happen eventually is it'll actually get back fairly close to where it exercises the city's, hopefully exercises the city's policy on policy for creating, for doing this kind of a review. So that again is another work in progress. And I'd also like to mention then the OPA meetings, as you've heard earlier, have been recommenced. And we had the first of the new series last week, and it was very interesting in that it pointed out some holes in the process, but it also pointed out where we have some active collaboration. And I've been in contact with Jolene Luna, who is the person at APD who's going to be running that process. And they have, she and Adam Paul Garcia, as an APD officer, have created a tracking spreadsheet for both CASA policies when they're going to be reviewed and non-CASA policies which are subject to regular review, and they've shared a draft of that with me. So I won't give any details about it, but it's ongoing, and it's the way that I think we're going to be able to accommodate policy review that we're supposed to do and keep the process moving forward. So, let's see, our next policy meeting is next Thursday. It must be the 24th. And we have a couple items on the agenda. One will be, APD will be present to present their current OPA or policy review process, and we'll continue the collaboration. And as Director Harness mentioned, we have also the first policy that was presented about Star Chaser. I think we'll have some discussion about that. And then since we now have our data analyst back on board, Dr. Miriam Verplu is going to, I think we'll have at least a mini brainstorming session as to what policies we're going to work on that need research that get initiated by the POB. So that'll be next Thursday, 5 o'clock at the normal, as soon as we get the agenda out. So that's all I have.
Thank you. We had discussed a handful of items that are on the agenda, further amending the ordinance, making semi-annual reports and annual reports, discussion around changing the rule that the chair and vice chair cannot succeed themselves, updating the ordinance further, which I think is already up there, and then anything else. I am uncomfortable having that conversation without Member Vandeventer here, so I would make a motion that we table that until the next board meeting.
A second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye, okay. Any opposed? Great, thank you. Let's, Member Fine, did Valerie by any chance ask you to fill in for her? Yes. Okay, so would you please give the case review?
Chair Galloway, there's one other issue.
Yes, sir.
Did you include the exit interview letter to the chief as well?
I did
In
not.
tabling, in your motion?
I don't have that on my original stuff, so the
Oh,
exit
yes.
interview.
Probably
Right.
because of all of the email problems, there was an amendment to the agenda to include item 3, exit interview to chief. There's a letter drafted by Member Vandeventer that you have in draft form for the board to consider sending to the chief for
Are you familiar?
a request for the implementation of the policy.
I would say yes, if we've got something that's being spearheaded by Member Vandeventer, we ought to hold off for her to be here. Does everybody agree?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Chair Galloway,
Yes, sir.
was she comfortable in letting us vote on this, or did she want to speak to this? To the letter to the chief?
Chair Galloway, Member Cruz, I know that it was brought forward at the suggestion of Member Dr. Cass, but I don't know whether or not, I don't know her status as far as her comfortableness of moving it forward.
Okay.
Yes, I mean, I suggested that we put it on the agenda, but I think that it's her issue, and I believe she ought to be here, she ought to be present to present it, so.
I agree. Okay, so then yes, we'll table that until our next board meeting as well. Do we need to vote on that? Okay, for clarity, can I have a motion to table that?
that we table.
Do we have a second?
The move is to table items 2 and 3, correct?
Correct.
Correct. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great, thank you. Thank you, Director Harness. Okay, so moving on to case review. Member Fine?
Chair St. John is having knee surgery tomorrow, which is why she's not here. So I'm a member of that committee, and Mr. Larson is also a member of that committee. And I don't remember the date. Oh, yes, wait a second, my minutes here tell me. We met on the 8th of May, and I just want to give you a general statement. We're having some concerns and discussions about administratively closed cases. These generate from the fact that there are, that the monitor has expressed concern that we're not administratively closing cases that we should. but it is not the monitor's job to tell us which ones those are. So the staff and Director Harness have chosen to administratively close some cases. Those of us on the committee have some issues with that, you know, and the basic principles of those conversations and disagreements are that the staff is putting a lot of work into some of those cases. Normally, up till now, administratively closed cases included, they were in Rio Rancho. They were not, so jurisdictional issues. There were the police officer who the complaint is about no longer works for the department, so there's no way that we can visit with him or her. And so those kinds of things. Yet there are some cases in here that we felt were, that the staff did an extensive amount of work to make the decision that calling the officer in was useless in the following way. The evidence they had examined had already told them that it was either not accurate, was not going to be accurate. And so Director Harness, to his credit, is trying to figure out a balance between, without definition by the monitor or the Department of Justice, on where that line should be. Some of those cases we felt should be on the cases investigated because so much work had been done. So we have some concerns about that. That being said, we reached the following suggestions to bring forward to the board. Administratively closed cases, all of the ones listed here are ones where we agree with Director Harness that these cases should be administratively closed. Again, we still have some questions, but we're willing to pass on these and say these should be administratively closed. So do you want to take these section at a time?
I have no idea what.
Okay, all right. Let me continue then. Cases investigated, we're going to need to go through those here. We felt, are these the ones that you're going to talk about, Director Harness? Or are you just going to talk about the non-consent agenda ones?
Chair Galloway, Member Fine, it was my intention to only discuss the cases on the non-consent agenda.
Okay. The cases investigated, there are 3 of them, and we agreed as a group with all of them. Is that true, Mr. Larson? Did I miss on that?
That's correct.
Okay. So we are recommending that those cases and the administratively closed cases should move forward to the board and be completed as written. And so I make a motion to that effect.
Just, forgive me, just for clarity, have you moved along in the agenda to our consent agenda cases and non-consent as opposed to just a report from the subcommittee?
Well, that's what we did at the subcommittee, was to bring them, to vote, to bring them forward to the board for a vote on passing them forward as they are. I just wanted to put it in context that we are
Sure.
having discussions about where the line should be on administratively closed cases. We're not done with that. But
Right.
for the time being, the committee met, and everything that's listed in 8A are cases which we as a committee reviewed and we felt should go forward as they are.
Okay. I think that that's helpful. I just don't think that we're quite there to vote on whether they should go forward or not, because we have a personnel committee that we need to also go through their report.
But this is the case review committee.
I know, but are we doing my question is,
Oh,
are we
am I
doing
doing the
the
report?
consent agenda cases or the report?
Okay.
You know
well,
what I mean?
The report is the case.
Okay,
It's
I
the same
agree.
thing.
I agree.
Okay.
When I set up the agenda, I made sure that the case review committee
Okay,
came
then we
right
can just
before
leave the
that.
consent agenda and all of that. All I can tell you is then the report from the committee is we are in discussions about some of the things that concern us. With that, there is no right answer right
Right.
now. We have to find the right answer together, and we're working on that. There were some things that were pulled out into the non-consent agenda from those things that we felt should not be administratively closed or otherwise, and those will be discussed later in the agenda.
Perfect, thank you. Any questions? Wonderful. Okay, moving on to the Personnel Subcommittee, or Ad hoc Committee, I think is appropriate. Thank you, Eric.
Chair Galloway, we had our Personnel Subcommittee meeting on the 11th, last week on Friday, where we reviewed 3 applications for legal counsel. There was one that stuck out for all of us in terms of the size of the team and their ability to address the consent decree compliance. So we were coming to the board to recommend that the Sutton, Thayer, and Brown be the counsel that the board tentatively chooses and press forward with, and give permission for the CPOA to press forward with in contacting them. So that's one. Next, we had tabled voting on the operating procedure for the director evaluation until we finish our goals, POB goal setting. But from that, from the legal counsel review, it looks like we will need an operating procedure for legal counsel search in the future, so I will be drafting that. And then finally, in your packets, you have the memo to City Council, which is, needs to go to City Council before their council break, so it needs to go needs to be on the agenda for their June meeting in order to extend Director Harness's contract. So you have a draft there. If you'd like to make any changes, Director Harness has the digital copy for that, and I believe you can put that on the letterhead, Director Harness.
Chair Galloway, Member Cruz, that's correct. Once I get the final letter approved, I will put it on letterhead for the chair's signature to forward to the City Council.
Okay.
Do you need votes on any of it? I would assume moving forward with legal counsel
Yes,
and this letter.
we need a vote on moving forward with the committee's recommendation to press forward with Sutton, Thayer, and Brown.
Okay, do we have a motion?
I so move.
And a second? Wonderful. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Wonderful, okay.
And we also need a vote on the letter for City Council from Acting Chair Galloway.
I will, Chair Galloway, I will go ahead and make the motion. I just want to commend you on the letter that you wrote here, Mr. Harness. I'm just being a bit of a smart aleck. I want to commend you on the compliments in this letter about your performance and endorse it. And I move that we forward this letter.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Wonderful, motion carries.
And just for clarification, that was, the letter was drafted up by me and
I
just had some.
understand that.
Yeah. And
Okay.
and our next Personnel Subcommittee is TBD until, or if we receive any non-concurrence from the legal counsel, then we have to go do another search, then we'll meet again.
Okay,
That is all I have.
wonderful. All right, member Fine, consent agenda cases.
Okay, here we go again. So, I am suggesting, the committee is suggesting that the administratively closed cases listed under 8A on your agenda be sent as written. So I'm making a motion to that effect.
Second.
Any discussion? So sorry. I have pulled out case number 093-18. I'm comfortable with the findings and administratively closing that case. Where I am less comfortable was what was occurring during that case. And if you'll
What
recall.
number did you say?
093-18.
Gotcha.
If you will recall, for members who have read this, this is the one where there were some children in Truth or Consequences, and it was brought up in the complaint that they were being abused. And my understanding is that because we don't have jurisdiction over that, we kind of administratively close the case and move on. I am uncomfortable with that. I think that at the very least, CPOA office can make a phone call down to Truth or Consequences Police Department or Sierra County Sheriff's Department to do a welfare check. It may turn out that there's nothing, but leaving vulnerable children at risk is not something that I'm comfortable with.
Well, and we don't know that that didn't happen. We can ask Director Harness, but it wouldn't be appropriate in the letter anyway. So, Mr. Harness, can you tell us what did you do other than close the case? We asked the same question.
Chair Galloway, Member Fine, I'm unsure as to whether or not the investigator in the case made a call to Truth or Consequences. I'm looking up the complaint now to see what information was there. There was a phone number and an address. Oops, and I just turned off my computer. I understand Chair Galloway's concerns. Without having it written anywhere, if we have something that we feel is urgent and credible, then we do make follow-up phone calls with the appropriate agencies. In this case, I'm not convinced that it was credible, and so there wasn't anything that I felt needed to be followed up with.
And I know that you and I had that conversation, and I certainly understand why there was a question to the credibility of it. But I would pose to the board, is that a decision that we're comfortable with, making the judgment call on credibility when there are children involved?
Well, I think that it would be useful to, if this, I agree with you. I'm certainly going to err on the side of doing child welfare checks and all of that. I think we've seen enough in the news of things, and we've handled cases here that are serious in that regard. It can't be more serious. So I think that it's important that those kinds of actions take place. I think that we know less than what the staff knows about this. And there was some question about whether or not the children really were in danger.
Right.
And, you could also send people on a wild goose chase. So, and waste everybody's time. So I think that that's a call. Certainly a director from the board would be appropriate that said, if you have any reason to believe, err on the side of caution. And I think that's what they're doing anyway. So I don't know that any other action on our part, other than to be directive and say, it's not okay, if you always err on the side of reporting it, if you can. You can always say, I'm not sure of the credibility of it, but I'm calling to tell you about it anyway. So I would be surprised if the staff didn't do that.
Yeah, I would be curious to know. It would be nice to have that
Well, it's
documented.
possible for us to withdraw this one and,
I'm
as a board,
I'm sorry.
and ask for more information, put it on the agenda for next month, and say we want to know more about that particular case, and we can pull it out, as we've done with some of the others.
And I think that there are, thank you for that, I think that there are a couple of issues at play, well, maybe not. Unfortunately, I didn't print that case and bring it with me. I've just got the letter. Maybe. Does anybody else have any opinions with
Chair
regard to
Galloway,
this?
I've spoken with Director Harness about it, and I know it's a very difficult decision sometimes, especially with the nature of the complainant in this case. The only comment I have is that it's a tough decision, and I'm glad to hear that that if it's urgent and credible, they will follow up. The problem is trying to decide urgent and credible, and almost we have to defer to Director Harness and the investigator, I think. However, I believe this is the case where you had spoken with this complainant a couple of times, Director Harness, and in those conversations, he gathered more support for his opinion that this would, you did not speak to her?
Chair Galloway, Member Larson, no, that's a different case
Oh.
where I spoke with a complainant.
Okay.
That would
so-
be 90, not 93,
Oh, okay.
which is on the non-consent agenda.
Okay, well, then I'm wrong, but I still, that you talked to her, I'm wrong, but I'm not disagreeing. I think that this is an interesting case that maybe is the kind of thing that we should look at what kind of policies the CPOA has to operate to be sure that's happening, and I'm confident it is. It's a tough call, and especially with today's environment with kids. So,
Well, the other thing that's important to note is that in some of these cases, having read so many for the last 3 years, there are positions in which a complaint is filed so that, for example, and I'm sure the police are very familiar with this as well, but the complaint is filed because the kids are the moving pieces between two people, two parents, and you don't want to get sucked into that either. At the same time, you have to err on the side of caution, I think, always. And I'd rather make a call that goes nowhere to CYFD in Las Cruces than not make it and find out later that that was a call that should have been made. And I'm sure the police do this every day, you know.
I'm in agreement. I would prefer that we err on the side of caution, and so perhaps we need to kick back to policy and procedure, I suppose would be the appropriate committee, to maybe work with the CPOA to develop some kind of criteria surrounding cases like that. I don't want to pick up a newspaper someday and read that some children in Truth or Consequences were, you know,
I agree.
abused or murdered.
If
Dr.
I can.
Cass?
It seems to me it ought to stay with case review, that it is a complaint, it's a citizen complaint, not case review, but citizen
Sure.
complaint. And I don't know how, I mean, it was kind of a surprise, I don't know how to handle this as a policy issue, I don't know. I'd like to hear from Director Harness on this, as to who should review this policy, or review the process, because I presume that you have a process established for this. I mean, and maybe, it seems to me that you would already be dealing with this with some kind of an implicit process, if not explicit process, but
Chair
there's a lot
Galloway,
of judgment involved here, so.
Chair Galloway, Member Dr. Cass, yes, there's as you expressed it, an implicit policy in that we want to make sure that we're good actors in the community. In this case, in reviewing the entire complaint and the allegations contained for all of the levels of involvement and all of the levels of conspiracy and all of the levels of citizens and non-citizens within the United States, and the fact that this complainant alleged that she had already been a victim of homicide, I just didn't find it credible. Beyond that, there are certain parameters that for the board, and the parameters are to agree to recommend a different filing based upon a review, or to send it back for for further investigation. I would not be in favor of the board putting the CPOA in the position of being a mandatory reporter. That would be a use of our resource that would greatly hinder our operation.
I agree with Mr. Larson. I think that we should leave it to the staff to figure it out. We've had this conversation, we've expressed our views. Obviously, I would be surprised if Director Harness doesn't share those views in terms of being a contributor to harm to a child. But I would say it's his decision to make, and it's as a committee, it's our committee that needs to flesh these out and ask those questions of Director Harness, which we have done. So that's what I would leave it at that.
So then we have a motion and a second to approve the administratively closed cases as they are. All in favor?
Yes, we do. Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, any opposed? Great.
We have cases investigated in all three cases here. The committee members agreed with the staff in their assessment, in the quality of their investigation and the assessment of what should occur. So we are saying that, having discussed these with the executive director, we agree that these cases were handled properly and the recommendations are correct. And so we are recommending to the board that you approve these as written as well.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Great. On to the non-consent agenda items.
Mr. Harness is going to do those.
Chair Galloway, CPC 228-17. Maybe I should back up a bit and say that I put these on the non-consent agenda based upon my review and my listening to the entire case review committee. It didn't appear that there was a consensus, so I thought it better to err on the side of having them on the non-consent agenda so that they could be considered fully by the board. So starting with CPC 228-17, the complainant went to a substation to complain that her son, who suffered from mental illness, was released from the detention center, and he had not been heard from since post his arrest. He was arrested for domestic violence. She also alleges that she was given certain assurances that he would get mental health. He would get mental health help. This case has been administratively closed because in the review of the lapel videos and the fact that this was a domestic violence arrest, which was mandatory at the time, the woman alleged that she was struck to unconsciousness and she lived with the son. This was a mandatory arrest. As for his release, that does not fall under the purview or the jurisdiction of the Albuquerque Police Department, so therefore it was administratively closed.
Chair Galloway, I thought that I asked to have this on the non-consent agenda, so, but I will respectfully disagree, and I'll give you the reasons why I think it should be sent back. I won't vote to approve this. The introductory paragraph leaves out the fact that the email, the citizen complaint, was sent on Saturday, July 1st, 2017 at 9:37 p.m. The investigator wasn't assigned until December 19th, some 6 months later. And that's a violation of the city ordinance where we're to begin immediately after the complaints are filed and to proceed as expeditiously as possible. By not reporting that fact that the email citizen was sent that early fosters questions regarding the transparency on the part of the CPOA and the POB. As far as the complaint, I'm going to, for the benefit of the people that are in the audience or people that haven't read this, I'm just going to go through it briefly. Donna H. Submitted an online complaint about how an incident with her adult son was handled. Mrs. H. went to the substation seeking help because her son struck her the previous night. That's what's in the complaint. The investigator, this is a comment, the investigator wrote a memo to the Police Oversight Board Policy and Procedure Subcommittee identifying portions of SOP 219, Response to Behavioral Health Issues, that need to be rewritten and revised. In that same memo, the investigator expanded on the domestic violence incident and stated her son struck her several times, prevented her from leaving the house, and seeking medical attention or calling the police. And now tonight, you have added the fact that he struck her and knocked her unconscious. None of that is in any of the reports. None of that is in the CPOA report. Now back to her complaint. Mrs. H. explained her son had mental health problems. Mrs. H. wrote the officers, assured her that if she filed the complaint about the battery, that her son would be placed in jail on the mental health side. Mrs. H. wrote she was told her son would be evaluated for 3 or 4 days and appropriate action would be taken. Mrs. H. wrote officers told her that her son would be safe and in jail until his hearing in July. Mrs. H. was upset because what actually happened was very different. Her son was arrested but did not have his phone or wallet with him. The jail released him less than 24 hours later and dropped him off on a corner at 2 a.m. with nothing. This is what she said in her complaint, but that's not in this part of the complaint in the CPOA report. All we have had is lies and non-caring on the part of APD. Then she wrote this, Mrs. H. wrote, APD has done nothing to assist her in finding her son. Then this is written in her complaint, but not in the CPOA definition of the complaint. When my daughter from California called APD, she was told that they don't look for adults unless there are mental problems. We keep telling them that, but nothing is being done. If I knew this was how you were going to handle it, I would never have signed the complaint. That sounds to me like a complaint about the police department, not about MDC. The investigation now. This starts out by saying the CPOA investigator reviewed the police report and the lapel videos of the incident. It doesn't say what officers or what lapel videos. There's no indication in the CPOA investigator interviewed the complainant during this investigation. No statement about that. Now that may be because it's 6 months later before they got the case. Mrs. H. came to the substation and reported a domestic violence incident with her son from the previous night. Nothing about the being denied access to medical services, being denied access to leave the facility, being knocked unconscious. Officers were very concerned for her safety, took her statement about what happened, and had a victim's advocate respond to assist her. The officers explained the victim's advocate would assist her in obtaining an emergency restraining order so that Mr. H., her son, could not return home to commit more violence. The officers broached the subject of restraining orders because they wanted her to be safe when her son was released. Excuse me. This raises questions and answers none, like did the victim's advocate provide any assistance? Was an emergency restraining order obtained and filed on the son? And then the statement is in, this is the investigative report, there was no specific talk of keeping him in jail until July. What kind of talk was there, is my question. Mrs. H. expressed her son had nowhere to go when released, so another officer mentioned there were shelters and halfway homes her son could stay at while applying for services. The report says the sound was poor on many of the videos, but as best as could be heard, there were no specific promises made as to what could happen. The preponderance, this is my comment, the preponderance of evidence burden is not imposed on any party to a civilian complaint, but instead rests with the investigative agency. The poor sound of the many of the videos and the statement that as best as could be heard, there were no specific promises suggest a possibility that if the complainant may have been just as she claimed, assured if I filed a complaint, he would be placed in jail on the mental health side, he would have been evaluated for 3 or 4 days and have appropriate action taken. And she also said he would be safe and in jail until his mid-July hearing. The investigative report says any such promises would be unlikely because whether someone is released or held up is up to the judge and the jail process, not APD. This statement, this is my comment again, this statement supports a judgmental conclusion in favor of the officer's claims over the complainant's statements, and her statements are the heart of the complaint against APD, and some of her statements appear to be compliant with APD's SOPs cited below. Where did she get that information? Now, when officers took Mr. H into custody, he did not have property on him and did not request anything. The report doesn't say when the officers took Mr. H into custody. Were they the same officers to whom Mrs. H had made her complaint? And what were the charges? Was she present when he was arrested? The investigator's memo to the Policy and Procedure Subcommittee stated that SOP 219-85C5 states, if the individual is not appropriate for jail diversion, the officer should ensure that the individual is referred to the Psychiatric Services Unit within the detention center by writing PSU referral at the top of the pre-booking slip. The question is, did the arresting officers do this? And there's no way to verify this on the form without getting a copy of the physical form from MDC. But in the letter to the POB, it says, in this case, MDC Records Department was uncooperative. What does that mean? And if they were important enough that we tried to get them and they were uncooperative, why didn't we follow through and get them? The next SOP states that when officers take a prisoner to the Metropolitan Detention Center and have knowledge of a prisoner who has some kind of behavioral health disorder, they will notify the Metropolitan Detention Center medic, who can then notify Psychological Service Unit, PSU. The officer will forward a copy of the offense or incident report to the CIT Area Sergeant Coordinator. My questions are, did the arresting officer have knowledge of the son's mental problems and prior suicide attempts and thoughts of suicide, and did they notify the MDC medic? The COP report is silent on that issue. The issues of Mrs. H wrote about concerning her son's release are the issues with the jail and not APD. I agree with that. Arrested persons, placement in jail, and how long they're here is outside of APD control. Again, though, did APD notify MDC of the son's mental state the night before, because they were aware of it, and when they arrested him? She writes that they did nothing to help her when she reported her son missing, but officers took a missing person report and entered him in NCIC. The question is, when her daughter called from California, she was told that they don't look for adults unless they have mental problems, and the question is, what are the APD SOP requirements when a reported person is claimed to have mental problems, even though they're 21 years old? The cause of Mr. H arrest did not fit the criteria for jail diversion. Okay, in conclusion, the CPOAs made the decision to administratively close the complaint as Mrs. H concern about how the jail handled her son's brief incarceration and release is outside of APD's control and therefore outside the CPOA jurisdiction. My question is, what about resolution of the complaint of allegations about what was told to the complainant by APD, and what about the APD arresting officer's compliance with SOP 219 elements cited when booking the son? Administratively closed complaints may be reopened if additional information becomes available is a statement that's on the bottom of some some CPOA reports, but it's not on all, and it's not on this one. As I said earlier, there is more information in the memo to the CPO, to the Police Oversight Board, on the fact that her son struck her several times, prevented her from leaving the house, seeking medical attention, or calling the police, which I think is a significant issue. She also says that she hasn't seen, at the time that she wrote the complaint, she hadn't seen her son. I just think that this is a wholly insufficient investigation. I really disagree with your, I think, limited conclusion that it's just an MDC problem. And I'm not going to vote for it. I'm going to vote to send it back to you guys to find out what's going on.
Just for clarification, Member Larson, what were the dates of the event and then the follow-up by CP, by the
The date of the
CPOA?
event was July 25th or 26th, 2017. The report was filed on July 1st of 2017. An investigator was assigned on December 27th, 2017. And I think Director Harness and I have discussed several of these kinds of cases with the time delay, but this case with a lady who is missing her son seems particularly egregious to me, and that's why I took the board's time with this.
One other question, and that is, you mentioned, at least I heard, Policy and Procedures Subcommittee on a couple of occasions. Was that accurate, or was that?
Of course it was accurate. It's a memo in the file, but I believe it probably wasn't sent because it hasn't been approved yet. That's my guess. But it's dated March 28th. It's to you and Eric Cruz, Member Cruz, and Director Harness. And on, March 28th, I was still on the board too, but anyway, thank you.
I think that my experience in the human service arena and with the police department over the last 3 years is that the pain and suffering of family members of people with mental illness is very real and very difficult. And there are limited to no resources in this community to deal with them, which hamstrings the police in a very serious way. It hamstrings the whole community in a serious way, but the people who are left to deal with these issues are the police. And I think the policies, which Mr. Larson referenced, are very clear in what to do. I have no way of knowing that any of those things were done. And so with the caveat that there are moms out there with sons who are, children who are adults and have mental issues that are frustrated in the extreme and want to have solutions presented to them, and their only avenue is the police department. I understand all that. It doesn't mean that this particular case, was investigated the best way that it could. So I think it's incomplete. I think that Mr. Larson is correct, that it's incomplete. There may be other issues having to do with the delay. As a committee member for case review, I want to know why it took 6 months for this to get to an investigator. And I want to know why some of the things, Mr. Larson did a great job of explaining what his concerns are, and I agree with them. So I think my suggestion is that this be not put forward and sent back to the staff to complete the investigation and answer Mr. Larson's questions.
Is that a motion?
Yes.
Member Fine? Do we have a second?
May I address?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Chair Galloway, members Larson, and members Fine. As we have discussed on numerous occasions, we did have a system that was not efficient for the intake of our complaints as we were trying to resolve them in an informal basis. I have had that discussion with you several times, and I thought that that was understood. With our caseload, there are going to be investigations that are not done within the time parameters. So those will be violations of the ordinance. As it relates to this case, I stand behind the investigation. The investigative file is for review. It is available. I think it's hard to reach conclusions such as Member Larson has reached without looking at the investigative file and without looking at the entire portion of the investigation. So I believe that the case should be administratively closed and stay as it is.
Chair
Okay,
Galloway?
We have a motion. Do we have a second so we can
Well, I would
continue
like to
discussion?
respond. Yeah, I'll second the motion, and then I'd like to just respond.
Please do so.
It wouldn't be any question if the investigative report was written like an investigative report or a CPOA report would be written. You explained to us several times that, gee, we made mistakes, our caseload, all of these reasons. As far as I'm concerned, I'm tired of hearing those reasons. And you signed the letter, so you have to stand behind them. But I think it's a wholly insufficient report if I have to then go read the investigative report to come back with these things. And your decision to not put the date that the complaint was filed, it really troubles me because it's not a factual, transparent report. And I think it highlights several problems with a lot of these reports. For example, the rest of the non-consent cases, I think are going to have to be tabled because Chelsea is the one that was pushing those, and she's not here, or Ms. Vandevender. But I'm seriously concerned about this, and I don't accept your statement and criticism that I didn't go look at your investigative file. It's not my job to go look at your investigative file. It's your job to adequately reflect what was done in the investigative file in this report. And my opinion is you didn't do it. And your name's on it, so you're the one that's responsible.
Chair Galloway and Member Larson, I disagree that it is not your job to look at the entire investigative file because that is exactly what's detailed in the ordinance if in fact you do not want to follow the findings. So this is a findings letter. It is not the entire investigation. It is not the entire investigative file. Secondarily, I have described to you the new efficiencies that we've put in place so that there is not a delay in the cases any longer, and that has been in effect since March 1st, and I have told you that repeatedly.
Okay, gentlemen, I think that we have had our say. Is there any additional discussion on this case?
The intent was the motion was just to not vote on 228-17.
I think it was not to allow it to go forth, not to allow this finding letter to go forth
Okay.
to the complainant. Is that
Because
correct?
we see it as incomplete.
Okay.
And I will take the middle ground here and say that I think that the complaint did specify very clearly some APD issues as well as the MDC stuff. So I would take a vote then, all in favor of moving this letter forward and allowing it to go out to the complainant. Aye?
No, well, I have a motion on saying that this should go back to the staff, so we should
Okay,
have
so-
vote on that.
So then we'll word it that way, to a motion to have this letter go back to the staff for further investigation.
Yes, because the board sees it as incomplete.
And is that what you seconded,
Yes.
Member Larson? Okay.
Yes.
That motion on the table, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Great. So Director Harness, if we could get some answers on those APD complaints as well in a new findings letter, that would be appreciated.
I have just a clarifying question, and that is, so in a case such as this, what's the normal process to follow? Just for my edification.
Chair Galloway, Member Dr. Cass, there are 3 provisions for voting on a non-consent agenda case. Or I'm sorry, yes, for voting on a non-consent agenda case. First, you approve the findings and recommendations as proposed. 2, you approve other findings and recommendations as determined by the POB and supported by the investigation file. Or 3, defer action on the matter to allow further investigation or analysis by the director.
So we did 3.
Thank you.
Member Fine, do you want to, at the suggestion of Member Larson, table the 3 remaining?
Well, there's 4.
4 remaining?
All 4 hers? Okay, then let's just defer all the non-consent agendas to the next board meeting, to bring forward to the next board meeting with, and perhaps you can get together with, I don't know, do we have to wait to hear from Chelsea, or you already handled that within the committee, what her concerns were?
I have a point of order. Is that, I mean, it seems to me that this has been through, the CRC process, right? So I think I'm supporting what you're suggesting, and that is that if it's gone through this part of the process, because a particular board member with a particular issue is absent, this was already something that was decided in a committee.
To put on the non-consent agenda.
Yeah,
So for discussion. Can we discuss it fairly without her here, is the question.
And I would say that it should go forward. I mean, her presence should not determine whether the committee decision to send this to the board, obtains. So that's, I'm just asking.
Having it in the non-consent agenda means we didn't decide to bring it forward. We brought it forward for discussion only. Okay?
And I'm sorry, Director Harness, did you say that you pulled these cases out for the non-consent agenda, or the committee
We
did?
discussed them at the committee meeting. And
Chair Galloway, based on my best discernment of the discussion in reviewing the audio from the meeting, because I had to excuse myself halfway through, I thought that these were the cases that would be on the non-consent agenda.
Chair Galloway?
Yes, sir.
I don't feel as strongly as I did about that last case on these cases. I believe case 63-18 was one that the committee felt was an example of further discussion on whether it should be administratively closed or unfounded or something like that. And I think there were some other questions in Member Van Deventer's memo or letter that she sent that had to do with tone and some of those things. So at great risk of offending Member Van Deventer, I'm not sure that her not being here, that she would object if we said that these were okay, because I don't think we were pulling these because we disagreed with the decision, but what we thought was it was a discussion about that administratively closed issue.
Member Fine?
I just looked at my notes from the committee meeting, and that's true. All 4 of them are ones in which we, based on what I told you before about having a difference of opinion and trying to come to some conclusion about whether something should be administratively closed or not, 3 of the 4 of these remaining cases were ones in which we both felt they should be either exonerated, the officer should be exonerated, or it should be unfounded. And though we believe that, we still passed it as part of the consent agenda going forward. Director Harness pulled them back out because he wanted to show that. But we're not, as a committee, saying the administratively closed definition should be this. Okay, we're saying that that's a work in progress, and these are pulling out some of the cases in which we were concerned about whether or not administratively closed makes sense in the definition, because so much work went into most of them. So I agree with Mr. Larson, having looked at my notes. I think we can just pass these through.
Okay. Somebody
And
want
I
to make a
also
motion?
move.
Thank you.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. Thank you so much.
Chair Galloway, I have a question for Director Harness. When you read that to us, are you telling us that we can't send it back to you for being rewritten? when you read the options that we had under the ordinance?
Chair Galloway, Member Larson, what I'm telling you is that the only standard for an investigation to come back is for further investigation.
Well, we did that on the one case, and we're not doing it on the others. Is that not right? We are sending it back. In case 228-17, we are sending it back for further investigation, which is one of the criteria, and the other 4 we're passing through. We're just noting that they are ones that are concerns relative to administratively closed cases.
Chair Galloway and Member Fine, thank you.
Okay. Continuing on our agenda, let's see, the non-concurrence cases, there were none of those. And serious use of force cases, there were none of those, correct? No review of Garrity materials. Do we have any meeting with council? Any reason to meet with council?
Chair Galloway, no.
Great, thank you. Any other business?
Chair Galloway, I'm sorry that there's no one here from the mayor's office, but I read in the paper this morning that APD is conducting a review of the case with regard to the 7-year-old girl that was identified and as being a sex trafficking victim. And one of the things he said is many of the policies in this area are several years old, and I expect to be correcting them as part of this process. I don't know where the mayor was getting his information, but from what I saw, the Crimes Against Children Unit, which, or order, whose purpose is to propose the policy and describe the procedures for the Field Services Bureau, was updated on 10/25/17. And it says the dispatched officer's responsibilities for criminal sexual contact for children under 13 is the CACU will be notified immediately. Also, there is the juvenile section, policy 5.4 was also updated on 10/25/17, and it describes the duties and responsibilities of detectives and personnel assigned to the juvenile section. So in my view, APD has kept these 2 policies that relate to that current, and they're not years out of date. Also, there's something that I was going to recommend, but decided now that I'm not going to, but there's a procedural order for the Real-Time Crime Center that was dated September 8th, 2016, and it says Crimes Against Children Unit now has a case management system that the Real-Time Crime Center can access. Effective immediately, all juveniles, the bridge, that's sort of like the watch commander, encountered, all juveniles the bridge encountered on all calls will be searched through the CACU management system. Additionally, all juvenile calls will be considered Tier 1 and must be worked by the bridge. Tier 1 is not the same as Priority 1. Tier 1 means that these guys will start getting data for that call, but it doesn't have to be a Priority 1 call from dispatch. RTC Procedural Order 1702, Children, Youth, and Families Department Law Enforcement Portal dated May 16, 2017. It says the RTCC has been granted access to CYD Law Enforcement Portal, which contains information on active and past CYFD cases and juvenile criminal history. The portal will be utilized in all calls in which a juvenile has been injured or neglected. There is a history of violence in the household. A juvenile call originated from a school, and wherever operators doing background criminal checks on juveniles. This procedural order complies with the prior order, which requires all operators to search Crimes Against Children system. It seems to me that those are things that are in place, that have been in place to try to protect these children, and I'm hopeful that APD is, I guess they're doing an internal affairs investigation, And then lastly, the Civilian Police Oversight Agency is to monitor, the administrative office through the executive director and staff shall investigate all civilian complaints relating to police conduct, monitor and report on police internal affairs matters. And then another section of the ordinance says the director shall report directly to the POB and lead the administrative office, independently investigate and supervise all investigation of civilian complaints, audit all IA investigation of complaints. I think that I would like to make a motion that we ask the CPOA to immediately get involved in auditing, or not auditing, but monitoring, not doing the investigation, but watching the investigation that IA, if they are doing an investigation, into what happened with that case, so we don't get left behind on this, and then in 2 or 3 months, we start trying to figure out what happened. I know we can't do any investigation with them, or we don't want to interfere in it at all, but we want to monitor it and see what they're doing and what's going on, so we will know from our own investigator, because we know that there was a miscommunication by APD on the Victoria Martins case, and there was an extensive amount of work done after the Omari Varela case. And I'd like to see us, as the Police Oversight Board, through the CPOA, have more real-time insight into this particular investigation. And we have to respect APD's privacy and all the privacy and not disclose any of that, but then we will know at the conclusion. We're not asking to be told every day or anything like that at all. So that's my motion.
Member Fine?
I have a question. Would it be possible for us to, as part of the APD's report here, to ask how that's going, like when they came up and spoke? Is it to the extent that they could share with the public, which is, I think, the rule they would have with us as well? Could we ask them to give us an update on that case? Is that a legitimate request that we could make so that we could get information on that case? I really agree with the idea you're talking about. I'm talking about different ways we could get information. And so I just don't know how the staff could actually intersect with that in a logical way, process-wise. So I'm wondering if we could ask for an update from APD on that case at these meetings going forward. Would that suffice for what you're thinking of or not?
Member Fine, Chair Galloway, not really, because what I'm asking is that we have somebody there with them, you know, maybe talking to them periodically or fairly regularly. They don't have to go out and do interviews with them or anything like that. But because I think it's a level of trust building from my perspective. And I would like to see the Oversight Board be a little more assertive rather than reviewing everything way after the fact.
Well, I think that in an informal way, that makes sense. You know, I know they have good relations and, you know, with the police department in many different ways. So that may be a way to just informally do it, just so that you're just saying, you know, and one of the things that comes to mind is when there's an officer-involved shooting call-out, Mr. Harness is called to go to that site. So it's not dissimilar, in my view, to do the other and to keep informed without being a pain and without interfering with their process, so that we are at least up to some speed and understand what's going on.
Chair Galloway.
I just, if you'll give me just a moment, I think we have a motion that we need a second, and then we can continue discussion on, and I would be happy to second that motion. I'm in agreement. Okay.
Okay,
Yes,
given that.
Member Cass, or I'm sorry, Member Larson.
I'm unclear on the motion. I think I would like to hear a restatement of the motion but in order to move this forward in a shorter form if possible.
I agree, Member Cass. What I'm anticipating, or what I'd like to make a motion is that we ask the CPOA to be in daily contact at the end of the day or sometime during the day with the investigator that's in charge of this investigation, if there is an internal affairs investigation, just so they have a status update, not to make it to us, but to keep it for their own record, so we then have our own record at the end.
Clarification, are you referring strictly to this case, this particular case?
Yes.
Okay, any additional discussion?
I'll second that motion, and then,
I've seconded it. But my question to you, Director Harness, is what kind of strain will that be on your resources? Is a daily briefing too much? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
Chair Galloway, I'm not sure, because I'm not sure how extensive this investigation is going to be based upon the history as described. I'm a bit at a loss, since I do get a weekly update on the status of each internal affairs investigation as to the allegations, the parameters for the due dates, who's assigned, and who the target officers are. I would I'm not sure how productive a daily call to Commander Miller or whomever the investigator is regarding the status of the case. I'm not sure how productive that's going to be.
Chair Galloway and Director Harness, I think you raise a good point. And I would be willing to withdraw the motion if you'll make the commitment to always ask about the status of that during your weekly calls.
Chair Galloway, Member Larson, I don't do a weekly call with internal affairs. I get a weekly Excel spreadsheet as to the status of each internal affairs investigation. Chair Galloway, Member Fine, if in fact there is an internal investigation and there are target officers, then yes, it would include this investigation.
I think perhaps the level of uncomfortableness that I'm feeling, and perhaps you as well, Mr. Larson, is we're unaware of that stuff. I understand that you do, but we don't know where things stand with this investigation or any particular investigation that you're having those weekly email spreadsheets sent to you on, right? Until they come before us. And my I guess concern is that it seems like a lot of the cases that we're reviewing, I understand the significance, I've heard you discuss it in the past, Member Fine, that we have an obligation to the community to discuss cases regardless of how far back they may be, but it kind of limits our ability to affect change in APD in the community that we're in today. And so I think that this was, for me, kind of a jumping off point to be able to do something real time. And be involved in that process real time. I don't know if anybody else experiences that same desire to make a difference now and not rehash things that we've done in the past or that have been conducted in the past.
The truth is, our job in reviewing is not to participate in the investigation. Not to participate in the investigation that APD does. That's their work. Our job is to review that investigation and for quality, for intensity, for all the things that for policy, for all of those things. So that's our job in terms of oversight. It's our job to review that. This feels a little bit like participating in it, and I understand the intent, but I also think daily is too intense. If I was the police department, I would not answer your calls because they're busy trying to do the work they're doing. And so I think that, I would be more comfortable with something that was an informal conversation that said, how's it going? Every month or every week or whatever. This is going to take a long time. Mm-hmm. And so I would be more comfortable with a informal arrangement and an informal thing. Obviously, we're concerned about these kinds of cases. The community is concerned about these kinds of cases. I think that's legitimate, but I don't think a daily call it's too much.
I'm in agreement with the daily conference call being too much, but I think an update on whatever schedule you feel like is appropriate, and then a report back to the board on a monthly basis until this is resolved would be nice, just as part of it being included in your report. But that's one issue, and I think that, yes, our responsibility is to review, but it's also to oversee, right? It's overseeing the entire process. And I would like personally to see us doing something in the here and now, and not rehashing things, or solely rehashing things that are from 2014, 15, 16. That is a bit.
I understand that desire.
I'd like
I just
to-
don't want to get in the way.
I'd like to call the question. I'd like to call for a vote of the motion.
Okay. Do you want to restate your motion with the suggestion from Member Fine? Or keep it as is?
No, I'll just withdraw the motion, and you guys can figure out what you want to do, because I've already told you what I wanted to do, and so I withdraw the motion.
I think the takeaway is that we are interested in these cases as they come up. It is part of the questions we would get from the community. And people know we're on this board, they're curious about that. In particular, I think that the part that Mr. Larson brought up about the mayor's information being
Inaccurate.
out of date with the work that CACU has done. You know, our job is not only to critique the police department, but to say they're doing a good job about this. And Mr. Larson has done that work and has seen and checked and visited and spent his time finding out the work indeed that they did subsequent to the last case, which involved the murder of a 7-year-old child. So I understand the motivation that he has, and I agree with that. I just don't think the process, it's ours to inject ourselves in the process. So it would be good to take that away.
I think we've finished this question.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I would just add, I personally would appreciate it, and maybe we can discuss this further, if we had an update. If you would
Chair
pay
Galloway,
special attention.
perhaps to put the board at some matter of ease, I did call Internal Affairs this evening, or I'm sorry, this afternoon, anticipating this question so that they are aware of our interest, and we will stay in touch with them.
Thank you. All right. Any other business?
Motion to adjourn.
Yeah.
I make a motion to adjourn.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Thank you, everybody.